Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm Dr. Elaine Hamm, the executive in residence at Tulane School of Medicine and co-founder of Cadenza Bio, a preclinical company developing new therapeutics in neuro and in women's health. And I want to welcome everyone to a second in a series of webinars that Tulane and Baker Donelson are hosting to really help explore topics that are pertinent to moving science to eventual products. And I'm really excited about today's webinar. I've been on a lot of different sides of the negotiation table. I started my career in tech transfer, trying to find ways to move technologies forward. I've sat on the investor side, trying to find ways not just to fund companies, but hopefully make them successful. And I have been on the founder side, trying to get companies financed and working with investors and negotiating partnerships with pharmaceutical companies. And of course, spending a lot of time with lawyers, trying to make sure that everything that we are hoping to achieve and negotiating is actually the deal written on paper. So the key thing is every time I move from one side of the table to the other, I realize how much I really didn't understand about the previous side. And I wish I could go back and do things a little bit differently. Everyone may want the company and the science to succeed, but they're not always solving the same thing. And so I wanted to pull together a webinar that brings the perspective of all of those players, the tech transfer side, the investor side, and the large company side. And so, and of course, the founder side, that's where I come in. And then the legal side to help bring all of those together and hopefully make everyone maybe not, absolutely happy, but eager to move things forward. So today we're going to explore one deal, 5 different perspectives, and trying to understand the competing priorities as we think about transactions. Hopefully we won't get 4 perfectly aligned answers. I think that would make it pretty boring. So I hope that we can have a better understanding as to what everyone is trying to achieve from their perspective. And I will reserve the last 15 minutes for audience questions. So please send those in as we go. But most importantly, I am now going to give the floor to our incredible panelists to give a brief introduction to themselves and their organizations, and then we'll dive into questions. So I'm going to start with you, Jenna, because you're top of my screen. Jenna, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Elaine. Really appreciate the invitation to be here today and to participate in this engaging conversation where we can bring together multiple perspectives and talk through the scenarios. It's great that you represent all these sides, but for all of us, it's always a multi-party negotiation, and so it's just really great to share perspective. So I'm a principal with Two Bear Capital. I'm based out of our Boston Cambridge office. I've been with the team now for 6 years. We are early stage investors. We invest in both life sciences and tech. And on the life sciences side, we really look for platform approaches for therapeutics, early stage, preclinical. And the therapeutic areas that we spend the most time in are oncology, CNS, and some I&I. And we really look for opportunities where we think we can be a value add beyond simply the financial support. That's part of our thesis. We want to be, the friendly, helpful investors who are, we help our companies by taking board seats, but also we just want to be the invited thought partner. And so that's why, we sort of focus on these key areas because the background of our investment team reflects those areas. So we love to lead or co-lead, build good syndicates. Our typical check size can range from $3 to $10 million for first checks in, and then we reserve additional capital for future rounds as well. And let's see, I'm a neuroscientist by training, so scientist turned investor. I did my PhD at MIT. I was in Ed Boyden's lab there, building biotechnology approaches for nano architecture, discernment in various types of clinical samples. I also spent a number of years in the Alzheimer's space, building 3D human neural stem cell models with Rudy Tanzi. And so this type of deeply technical background is kind of reflective of what we have around the table at Two Bear Capital. And I'm just delighted to be here. So thank you, Elaine.
Great, Jenna. That was amazing. Paige, let's head to you.
Excellent. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Thanks so much, Elaine. This has been a great invitation. So thank you so much for having me. So I'm Paige Lacatena. I'm an executive director in Merck's Business Development and Licensing Group. I lead search and evaluation out of our headquarters office in Rahway, New Jersey, where I have responsibilities for neuroscience as well as ophthalmology. I have been with the company for coming up on 14 years, which is a long time, and have spent time in various roles. So I came in as a bench scientist after sort of the entrepreneurship of starting a small biotech company, after which joined Merck and led a small group of discovery scientists for a while. I moved around the company quite a bit. I spent a year in commercial, learning a little bit about late stage go-to-market plans, and then moved to our financial planning and analysis team, where I was moved to Europe, which was wonderful. I then came back into the sciences, realizing that yes, in fact, being a scientist does really makes me happy. So I joined our scientific affairs organization, where I had responsibilities for our investigator-initiated studies, or phase 4 studies for approved products. And then about 5 years ago, joined our business development and licensing team. And so similar to Jenna, certainly have somewhat of the technical experience background. And now from a BD lens point of view, really interested in all stages of development of assets. So sometimes people think of big pharma as really only being interested in late stage opportunities. But certainly from a Merck standpoint, we're open to where the great science is, and whether that's in an early discovery stage, target identification or validation and collaboration, all the way to life cycle management opportunities. So I look forward to today's discussion, and I'm sure we'll have some differences of opinion. I look forward to that. Again, thanks for the invitation.
Great. Let's move on to Chris, and then we'll have Andy. Chris?
Hi, everybody. I am Chris Sloan. I am with the law firm of Baker Donelson, and I co-chair our emerging companies and venture capital team. So as a firm, we're one of the 100 or so largest law firms in the US, and we're a full service business law firm. But I lead our team that's focused on representing entrepreneurs and investors that are trying to build scalable businesses. So we work with companies all the way from the, I've got an idea, what kind of entity should I set up stage, through seed, angel, VC, private equity, kind of wherever that journey might lead. I have done a lot of that in the life science and biotech world, and so also have a lot of experience with the tech transfer process, and have represented a lot of companies negotiating licenses for technology out of a lot of research institutions, notably Vanderbilt, because I'm based in Nashville, and I believe they've told me that I've represented more licensees than anybody else there, but I've also gotten a lot of experience representing licensees from any number of other for-profit and nonprofit research institutions around the US.
Wonderful. All right, Andy, to you.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Excited to join the panel today. My name is Andy Castillo. I'm the Assistant Director of Licensing with Rice University's Office of Technology Transfer. We're located in Houston, and I head up the licensing and commercialization for the office. We work both with established companies, but as well, support startups that are looking to commercialize Rice intellectual property. We try to work with the various components of the Rice ecosystem and try to do the diligence as well as the support downstream. My background is in the life sciences. I did my PhD at Baylor College of Medicine in molecular human genetics, postdocs at MD Anderson Cancer Center. So I try to leverage my cancer biology background to help with the life science startups, but as well, we've got startups from all different disciplines, and we're eager to work with as we can with these startups and try to get them down a path for success.
Amazing. Well, great. Let's kick this all off with a question to everyone, and then we'll kind of go through some individual questions that I have for you guys. But let's start out with one sentence that makes an early stage biotech transaction a good deal from your perspective. And really, what are you, who are you reporting to? What are your obligations that you have to protect that might create potential friction for others around the table? Let's start opposite, Andy, and then we'll kind of go around the table.
Yes. So, I think a good deal for us needs to strike a balance between having the licensee have the freedom and the runway to de-risk the technology and do the real commercialization that's needed, but to still ensure that there's good diligence milestones in place that bring that innovation to market in a timely fashion and for the general good of the public. But all the while, we still have to preserve the academic integrity and the research engine that created the discovery in the first place. So a lot of times we're looking to make sure that the university is fulfilling, if it's federally funded research, that we're fulfilling our BIDO obligations, that we're also thinking about making sure the technology is going out and being commercialized as opposed to being shelved. And then lastly, just managing, and since we work so much with startups, always just making sure that we manage any conflict of interest. So there's a lot that goes into it, but really it's just the ability to balance all of those so that we can really get the startups the opportunity to go out and do the commercialization that they're hoping to do. And rather than that being a stymie on their progression, just make sure that we understand what's important to them, but as well that they understand the perspective of the university and how the license terms are really more to fulfill our obligations to our stakeholders.
Great. Jenna, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, sure. So, when we're looking at, is there a little bit of a?
Not on our side.
Okay. Hopefully it's just on me. So when we're looking at early stage deals that are just sort of spinning out of academia at this point, what we really look for is, is this the right time for the company to be spinning out? I think a lot of folks have understandable enthusiasm for starting a new venture and, being an innovator and leading that forward. But it's good to consider, the timing there. And so, have you run the key kind of killer experiments in order to have a really nice developed data set? Because as soon as you kind of leave the cozy comfort of academia, you have things like burn rates and you have FTEs who are, relying on the income, and you have to, pay a lot more for your bench space. You might have had it for free before. You don't have access to cores. It's much more difficult to get access to samples. And so when we're looking at early stage opportunities, we really like to see that there's in vivo validation, even when they're early stage, even though we're often, first institutional dollars in, we're not likely to, just invest on idea on paper. And so the more fleshed out you have your data package, the more you're able to show, what you are actually doing to hit your target, validate that, any safety that you can do, any cross-model comparison. All of these types of things can be really, really helpful, because what that does is get you closer to the inflection points. And what we're thinking about is how many dollars and how long is it going to take to get to the next value risk inflection point. And as stewards of LP capital, we have investors just like the founders have, investors, and our job is to make sure that we're allocating that in a way that can help, bring innovative new medicines forward, and also, protect the, financial interests of our investors as well. So when we're looking at opportunities, we're considering, so many, and, we say yes to less than 1 in 100 that we see. And so the more that you can have a standout and credible data package that can lead us to conviction, that's what gets us excited.
Yeah, the timing of pulling the trigger is a fine balance, and I think that kind of perfectly leads to our to Paige and getting that feedback and understanding what the killer experiment might potentially be. Paige, love to hear your ideas on what makes a good deal from your perspective.
So I would say, first and foremost, Merck tends to look at opportunities that have incredibly strong scientific rationale, those that have the potential for clear promotable advantages versus standard of care. The asset itself or the opportunity has to have a differentiated biology, and it's not necessarily an incremental benefit that's based on, just sort of a slight improvement. And then it has to have a very clear, realistic path to become an important medicine for patients. And I think sort of above all, it has to sort of fit within our strategic areas of interest. So in order for us to really have an interest in pursuing a deal, it has to align with our strategy. Because we, similar to VC firms, we also have to have some level of deal economics that leave some level of meaningful upside for our own shareholders too. So it's kind of a combination of those 4 or 5 pieces that all have to fit nicely, perfectly for us to make it sort of a qualified good deal.
Great. And finally, Chris, you've seen a lot of different deals over the years. What, from your experience, have you seen that made a really good deal across the board from all of those different perspectives in your process of getting the deal done?
Probably the simplest way to answer that would be a good deal is a company that I think is investable. That encompasses a lot of different things. So, we are looking at the corporate structure to make sure that they're set up properly, that the ownership's properly documented. And if we weren't the ones who did it on the front end, then if we look and make sure that any cleanup that's needed gets cleaned up. We're going to look at the IP to make sure that they have or in the process of securing the necessary license rights. Basically, all the things that an investor might look at and be concerned about, we want to anticipate in advance and clean it up to the maximum extent so that these are issues that aren't being discussed and discovered during due diligence, which, as probably any of the folks on this call can tell you, is a very inconvenient time for them to be sorted out. So that's the way I would say it. We're trying to make sure that these companies don't have any problems that would make them uninvestable.
That's a really great point. And I know I have a list of questions that I've sent to the panelists ahead of time, but as usual, I've kind of gotten some ideas of listening to you guys of where to go next. But that's such a key piece of knowing sort of the chain of command of where everything has gone through, the chain of custody of where everything is. Do you guys have, and this is a question for everyone, are there tools? There's a lot of companies out there that claim to help companies from managing a shareholder agreement. There are companies out there that claim to have the best data room for early stage startups. Are there things that you've seen from a tools or software perspective that could help founders manage that really complicated process during a due diligence process, whether that's doing a deal for an investor or down the road when you're hopefully getting acquired by Paige down the road, that you have all of these things buttoned up?
I mean, I have some thoughts on that. I would tell you the first and most important thing, and obviously this is going to sound self-serving, have a lawyer that understands the world of working with high growth startups, because it is a niche expertise, and any random corporate M&A or securities lawyer isn't necessarily going to be familiar with this particular world and what's customary and what that journey looks like. So, the joke I use with people is, if you need heart surgery, you don't go to your family practitioner and ask them to operate on your heart. Maybe they did a rotation 20 years ago in med school, but you want the doctor that is cracking open chests every single day. This is analogous in that, lawyers who do this every day are going to be much better positioned, not so much understanding the technical part of this, but understanding what's customary, what the standard deal docs look like, how you negotiate and which terms you negotiate, that kind of thing. As far as tools that we use, there are some really good ones that help manage the corporate piece. So there's several cap table management tools. Carta's kind of the market leader, but Pulley's really good. Cake Equity's really good. There's some others out there as well. And I encourage companies to get set up on those earlier rather than later while their cap table is really simple, because that can help you avoid some painful cleanup problems down the road. As for data rooms for startups, you don't need anything fancy. I mean, it works just fine to throw everything on Box or Google Drive for now. The cap table companies will provide some portion of that as well, but you don't need to invest in the kind of data room that we might use for a high stakes M&A deal. That's really overkill for where most startups are.
Jenna, do you have any tools that you have seen work really well for your companies and helping prevent investor headache down the road in terms of cap table management or making sure the agreements are aligned?
Yeah, we use Carta across the board and internally, for the firm, and so that's we highly recommend. And in terms of data rooms, we see a variety of them as we're looking at in our diligence processes, and more so than the specific software itself is just having a data room that's well organized. And that's it's just really helpful if you have kind of a nice system. Things are well labeled, they're in a reasonable kind of layout, and also if you have a type of README document at the beginning that is,
yes,
here's where you should start, there you should go next, and then kind of subcategories to dive in deep for everything. And it is important to have kind of those reports and all the data in there unedited, and eventually we're going to want to really dig in there. And I'm sure Paige will agree, you can look at kind of all of the data that's been analyzed, but you're going to need to see the raw data at some point as well. And so just having good structure in there, get the folks around the table, whether it's your advisors or your investors or your friends who've done it before. Just have somebody take a look, and I think that will help others in the diligence process. So yeah, thanks.
Paige, any other tips?
Yeah, 100% agreed with Jenna. The organizational structure is so valuable. When we gather a due diligence team, it could be upwards of 100 people, it could be 50 people, it could be more than 100 people. And getting into the data room and having that README document and things very clearly laid out is so critical. The time, sort of thinking through, sort of getting to a deal is in a way related to how quickly can the team evaluate the data. And if we continually have to ask, like, hey, can you provide me the regulatory interaction that you had with this health authority? We can't find it in the data room. And that exchange takes X number of hours or X number of days. That just extends the time. And, generally speaking, we have governance meetings, so we're up against a pretty tight timeline. And if we don't have the data to present to our leadership, it just pushes us down the line to the next governance meeting. So then the deal is not, readily transactable.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think having that README doc, I love the README doc. That's a map to the data room where you're going to find X, Y, Z. And then IP summaries can be really helpful too, beyond just sort of here's a laundry list of patents, but here's where you're going to find the specific claims that were related to our indication. And then if you have the term sheet that kind of sums up what the university is the university agreement is, can always be helpful too. So, well, I love that we started out on we all agree diligence and good documentation and a good data room can really save time and ultimately money down the road. But let's talk about some things that might be a little bit different. So I kind of want to talk through Jenna, especially because this is something that I've experienced in licensing a technology from a university and then trying to raise capital. Are there any terms that you've run across that have been, I don't know about deal breakers, but something that has given you pause of, I don't know if this is going to necessarily be financeable for a Series A down the road? And then I'll follow up with Paige if there's anything that you've seen push a deal back down to the university. And then love to hear Andy's comments on all of those as well. So,
yeah,
Jenna.
Don't leave me out this one. I've got some thoughts on it.
I love it. Perfect. Great, Jenna. We'll hear from you.
Sure thing. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues out there, and there are a number of them, but one of the bigger ones really is change of control and assignment restrictions in the license agreement. So like if the license terminates automatically or requires TTO, TLO, consent for acquisition, that's going to be a really, really, really big hurdle. I'm sure Paige would struggle to, get across the finish line with that one. So we're all, having to think about what the exit plan is, and if there's something in there that's going to stop that, then that's really challenging. And another one that can be really challenging is, and this can be fixed with the right licensing group, if you're coordinated in your efforts. If there's a reach through on royalties for company funded improvements, that's just basically university collecting royalties as almost like a perpetual tax on, what the innovations that are going to come after you actually spin out of academia. And actually quite often we see this, that there's foundational IP that's licensed originally, and then as the company progresses, they continue to expand their patent estate, and often some of the key innovations aren't actually from that originally licensed agreement, but you probably will still keep that because it can be a defensive strategy. You don't want somebody else to move in there, which is a connection to another consideration that I think is a really big flag to look for, which is if there is non-exclusive licensing. And again, if you're the first ones to be licensing this is something that you can work with the licensing office to adjust. But if that ship has already sailed, and this is a small piece, the question is there enough there to build a company around, or are you going to have trouble staying in the lane with that non-exclusive license? And certainly we've seen this if it applies to certain therapeutic areas or modalities or something. There are ways that it can work, but that can be for sure a source of friction. And so I think there's sort of some curable versus structural ones, and kind of in the curable box, I would say royalty rates, milestone amounts, timing, maintenance fees, sub-licensing terms, like all of these I think can be negotiated, but it's really hard without the tech transfer office, working together to deal with kind of these termination, change of control, non-exclusive licenses, where that exclusivity, it really is a moat. If the university retains rights to license it to competitors. So, yeah.
That's great.
I could go on and on. But let me give others a chance to talk.
Great. Paige, I'd love to hear from you, because I've worked with a pharma company and I realized, oh no, I'm going to have to go back to the university and change this if this is how the deal's going to be structured. Anything that you've seen from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jenna covered a lot of it. It's really about sort of a fragmented ownership risk. And so if there's a university ownership plus the biotech ownership, if there's someone that's owning the platform, and then there's another plus the asset itself, so maybe there's a sort of a conflict there. There's co-development rights that sometimes can cause some friction. Rights of first negotiation, often, or refusal, sometimes also put, they hinder sort of the progression of a deal necessarily. And where this really comes down is sort of the risk associated with freedom to operate. If we want to expand into other indications, do we have guardrails that now we have to operate by? If there are other partners involved, can we expand ex-US? Are we sort of limited globally? What happens if sort of we evaluate the asset itself and maybe make a next generation molecule? What are the rights there? And so sort of these different sort of complexities often sort of, so the transaction really has a direct relation to the ownership of the asset or the platform. Yeah, I would say, and Jenna covered it really well as well.
Right. Perfect. Andy, love to hear your thoughts being on the other side. Andy, can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me or now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Perfect.
All right. Yeah, so I don't know that there's anything that's absolutely a deal breaker. We are usually pretty flexible, and fortunately being at a private university, we have a little more flexibility than maybe state institutions. But, I think to some of the topics that Jenna and Paige highlighted, with regards to change of control, and particularly in regards to like a merger acquisition, the only restriction that we usually have is that, we want to make sure that we're aware of who the new party is, or the acquiring party is going to be, and that they're not in a territory maybe where the university just can't do business with them. For example, like we'll have language in there that, they can assign to, in the case of a merger acquisition, but that, the assignee cannot be in a chartered or organized country that, is restricted from working with rights, an embargoed list or a sanctioned country. they can't be on a prohibited parties list. So there's like a set of limitations that we say, hey, these are people that we just usually can't do business with. But everybody else, we try to account for the case where there is, these transactions that happen quickly, and we don't want to be a bottleneck or a holdup that could lead to losing that opportunity. So, a lot of times we do provide some flexibility there, but again, it's just a matter that there are certain entities out there that we're not able to work with. With regard to sort of the improvements and extension of royalties downstream on those, really the license should be governed based on the IP that's being commercialized. We are comfortable putting in combination product language, or, if there's third-party rights that are sub-licensed as well, so we can put in the royalty relief provisions within our terms so that we can account for any other IP that the licensee may be taking in. So I think we try to make sure that we account for the needs of the licensee, but I think there just has to be a case made for others where, we don't give everything up front. It's just a matter of, we have to understand the rationale and need for those. Otherwise, I think we try to make sure that these deals are always going to work for us as well as work for the company. In my 13 years at the university, I don't know that there's ever been a deal that we've walked away just because we weren't able to figure things out. Maybe there were some, long and protracted negotiations, but ultimately we always came to some conclusion that allowed the deal to go through. But so far, at least I say, I don't want to jinx myself there. But.
Yeah, and then you bring up an interesting little thing that people don't often think about, but export controls, that small but mighty office within a university can be really challenging, and we sometimes forget about export controls. And
and that's the other thing as well. We do have here at Rice, we have a lot of federally funded inventions, so there's certain obligations with regard to Bayou and just the Fed terms that come with those. So we try to pass along those details so that the licensee can understand that it's not us imparting these obligations. It's really something that's a nature of the university being funded by a lot of federal dollars.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll go to Chris, but just from my founder's perspective, it can be a hard balance of understanding. As a startup company, you don't have a lot of money, so sometimes you want to push a lot of the deal terms to a later date. But then when you do a deal with Paige, perhaps then it's going to be complicated. And then there's a higher royalty rate that you gave on at the beginning because you didn't want to do the upfront. Well, now you have to go back because Merck didn't think it was as late a stage as the founders in the university thought it was. So the 6% royalty rate may not make sense, for a larger pharma company, and you may have to go back. So that's been something that I've had to negotiate and balance, as well as I can't do an upfront fee because I have low cash. However, what does that look like down the road for Jenna and Paige? So, and then Chris, what have you seen from the deal perspective of things that have been contentious as you kind of help all of the players around the table come to consensus?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered most of them. Andy mentioned the combination products language. That's a big one, and it's surprising to me how many license agreements we get initial drafts for that don't have that in there, because it's a very common situation. And to add to that, make sure it's really clear how it's going to work in practice. Like maybe even include some examples, because I have seen disputes over that happen on multiple occasions. Jenna mentioned overly broad reach through on company developed IP. That's definitely a big one. And I had a client last year that had a license with a major research university that had extraordinarily broad reach through on and claims to ownership of IP that was quite far afield from where they were. So we had to address that before they were fundable. But one that hasn't been mentioned is equity. It's very common for startups that are being spun out to pay some or all of the initial license fee in equity instead of cash. And so how that is structured and what governance rights, if any, go along with it can be really problematic. So things like strict dilution protection, I've seen that. I've seen overly broad governance rights that would be more akin to what a VC investor would get instead of just, a licensor. So what that equity arrangement looks like can be really problematic if it's not structured properly.
That's a great point. Jenna, is that something that you've seen, and what does your firm look at when it looks at the equity structure from a company that you're looking at from an investment perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen a very broad range of what sort of the desired numbers are from various organizations, and we have worked with companies that have licensed IP both from academic institutions and also from some international institutions, and there's a very broad range of just what different groups are looking for. I think there's a different level of sophistication in some of the universities that do this more often or have a bigger team to do it. And so they'll ask more and maybe expect a little bit more of a negotiation. Others, I think, are just, looking to get it done a little bit more quickly. We look at the full package, and there's all sorts of, considerations and, sublicense agreements and partnership considerations, and the package just has to make sense. And again, to the question of equity versus dollars, I think that has to do with what the financial strategy is and the funding situation is for that company, because sometimes one is more plentiful than the other, and certainly if there are really rich anti-dilution clauses or any sort of clauses for a right to buy more at the next round, or for the academic institution to get more equity at the next round, and also the transferable options on those, because there are a number of groups that are able to come in and kind of take that equity stake that is originally allocated to the university. How and when that can happen are all part of pieces of what we look at. And so the answer is it's kind of a multi-parameter optimization. You have to think about what the most important and significant items are on each side, and then figure out how to negotiate and compromise on the ones that are not the sort of the most critical aspects of the deal.
That's great. And this is, before I follow up with some additional questions around that, I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions for our incredible panelists, please drop them in the Q&A section of the chat here, and I will try to get to them in a few minutes. But I wanted to kind of touch base a little bit on the international piece of it that we've kind of mentioned, and hear from Paige, because one of the biggest issues I've seen has been where to file certain patents. As a university, has a certain budget. Startups may not have any budget, and really thinking about what is the right international patent strategy that you guys look for, and what is the bare minimum that founders and universities should be thinking about, because we live in a global stage here as we think about biotech, and love to understand sort of what you would like to see on the pharma side from an IP and international protection perspective.
Question. So, first and foremost, obviously in the United States, that's sort of the gold standard. I think beyond that, the EU5 is generally speaking where we tend to focus. And in addition to that, Japan, China obviously is sort of a big beast that now we're sort of becoming more and more aware of. I think those are pretty much the main locales. But again, being in a big pharma company does sort of allow us to file additionally, and that's another piece where, if you come in with something and that we think is tractable and has, a line of sight to the clinic and to be approved, we have a patent team that will ensure that the asset or the platform is adequately covered to the point that we can. I think that's, there's a lot of discussion around IP, I would say, on a daily basis. And so that's something that, I don't necessarily have as much day-to-day insight on with the patent team, but my interactions around patents are fairly substantial. So generally speaking, wherever we're planning to launch our products, we want to have patent protection. And at least at this point, again, sort of going back, the US, EU, the EU5, Japan, and if possible, China.
Do you think about Australia or Canada, or is that kind of nice to have?
We do. It's nice to have. It's nice to have. I would really want to defer to the patent team.
Sure, understand.
But those opportunities that I've looked at more recently have really focused on EU and on EU5, Japan, and the US.
I think that's great because, I mean, when people are sending technologies to you and they usually have sort of the status of the IP, knowing sort of like what might have it come to a screeching halt of having just one US issued patent that's very, very long in the tooth in terms of age may not, allow it to progress further down the diligence process.
That's a really good point. So I think, it depends on sort of the end goal, but at least from a Merck standpoint, we really love to see composition of matter with a long IP runway. And so I think sort of getting to, I think one of the earlier comments, ensuring that when you begin your patent process, you have very clear line of sight to sort of either the exit strategy and or where you think potentially you will be improving upon that molecule and can file new composition of matter. It's very valuable. It takes a long time, at least within a neuroscience standpoint. It takes a long time to run clinical trials in neurodegeneration, as an example. And so when you start your patent filing time, that 20 years goes awfully quickly, unfortunately. And so that's something that we also tend to look at in combination with the scientific validity and commercial evaluation and other sort of endpoints, but certainly patent is one of the main ones.
That's a really great point, especially as it relates to indication. The longer the trials, the more runway you're going to potentially need. So we do have a question from the audience of whether or not China IP filing is more important today due to competitive pressures. And I'll have that open to any here. Maybe Chris, you might help us on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a cop-out for a lawyer to say this, but it's somewhat fact-specific. It's certainly useful on the trademark side if you're going to be manufacturing in China. There are a lot of misperceptions about what you can and can't do in terms of enforcing intellectual property rights in China, and a lot of that comes from not understanding that it is a different system than what we have in the U.S. And so, in China, if you don't have a registration for a trademark, your U.S. trademark registration isn't going to do you any good as far as trying to stop somebody from making a counterfeit product that bears your mark, right? So if you're going to be manufacturing over there, that's the easiest way. Not that it's easy, but it's the easiest way is to hire a good lawyer who works in China and register your trademarks there, because that's how you stop counterfeiters on the ground. If you're only stopping them when they get into the U.S., you've kind of lost half the battle at that point. But as far as what you might want to do beyond that, what you might want to do in terms of patents, that's going to vary based on the facts. I mean, there are options in many circumstances, but sometimes it's not really pragmatic or it doesn't make sense depending on what you're working on.
Is composition matter? I mean, that's obviously the gold standard for most biotech, but is that something that you would push for startup companies to file their composition of matters in China? It can be quite expensive, so that's always something we want to try to manage.
Yeah, it all depends on what they're going to be doing. If they're going to be manufacturing in China, certainly helpful. If they're going to be selling in China, certainly helpful. If they think there's a high probability of knockoffs coming out of China, it might be useful. Those are kind of the things that we look at. But, it's also, as you say, not cheap to do it. I mean, you can go crazy filing patents all over the world and, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars doing it. You might have the world's best patent portfolio for a bankrupt company.
Yeah. Yes. I have had a company failed because of the incredibly expensive patent portfolio that was created prior to my joining the company. And then that became a huge burden over time. And it ended up being a pretty old patent portfolio by when all is said and done. So you gotta balance those things for sure. And that comes back to like Jenna. Yeah, well, sure. And no, that's and it goes a little bit back to the Jenna of like keeping things within the university as long as you possibly can, because you file your provisional, you convert it into your utility and get that PCT, and then you have 18 months before all of those international patents start coming into prosecution, and selecting countries can be a really expensive financial endeavor that can be challenging for a startup company. So timing can be really important as you think about launching your startup company as it relates to IP. Any other comments on the IP side?
Yeah, I was going to add that I think having a focused strategy for your IP portfolio is really important, because a lot of times we see, startups come in very aggressive and they want a patent on every iteration, and then they want to file broadly. And so now they're saddling themselves with, a lot of prosecution, but along with that, it's going to come all these expenses. And so having some kind of focus and understanding, what your primary markets are going to be and the products that you're hoping to get out is really critical for them in the early phases, so that they don't really burden themselves so much with those unnecessary expenses, with the idea that down the road, they're going to be generating additional IP, and maybe they're in a better position to file more broadly on those downstream pieces of technology.
Something that we encourage our scientists within academia to think about: if you're really pushing to have your tech transfer office file in a certain country, be prepared to help them understand what the business case for filing in that particular country may be. Maybe you're working on something that you think would be perfect for AstraZeneca. Well, and that is a reason to potentially file in Japan. So having the market understanding, not just for a startup company, but also the scientists within the university, I think is really key in making sure that you understand what's important and what really isn't. You don't need that patent in Chile sometimes. So, and that gets expensive for Andy there. So, well, again, if you have any additional questions, please drop them in the chat. Love to hear from our audience. But I really want to kind of move over to risk. And if there's any one risk that would be a showstopper, or maybe not even a showstopper, but would really make you push the deal off for down the road, or kick the can down the road. And let's start, Andy, let's start with you. Is there anything you've seen from a scientific perspective you're like, this is a huge risk, and I don't think this is something that we're going to invest in terms of filing a patent on?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when we're looking at it at the innovation from the research side, understanding where the technology currently sits in the lab, and what are their plans down the road. If it was a project that a grad student or a postdoc was working on, and they're either graduating or moving on, and that's going to be sort of the end of the road, that's going to be sort of a flag that then we have to consider is like, well, most of the research coming out of the lab is not ready for the prime time. It needs further development. And so if there's not follow-on researchers that are planning to take that to the next phase, that's something that could be, a flag there as well. Understanding if they want to do a startup, but then they haven't really done any of the legwork. It's not that that's going to put us off. It's just making sure that we might have to have a longer timeline and maybe get them some resources, maybe connect them and have some networking for them so that they can find the co-founders and the business partners that can help them take it to the next phase. Because the last thing we want to do is put a technology into a startup, but there's no real path or timeline for how the next pieces are going to come into place. So, a lot of times we can try to leverage option agreements or such where they have some additional time to kind of get some of those pieces in place. But yeah, I think for us, if there's no clear path for how to take it to the next phases, that's usually going to be the biggest question mark on should we even move forward with the IP filings on that.
Great. And then Paige, anything from your perspective that whether it's an untested target or a incomplete data package, what are the things that you think about from a risk perspective of, this is interesting, but I think this is too big of a leap for us?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think everything has to sort of sit within the strategic framework of the company. So if it is outside of that strategic framework, that's sort of already one sort of not necessarily great thing in terms of us progressing with a deal. We at Merck really pride ourselves on the science. So if the biology and the scientific validity of the asset and the mechanism are true and repeatable, that's a strong vote in the yes column. Where there's validation of maybe it's in an animal model, maybe it's in a small proof of concept study in the clinic, those are all much more supportive of the yes column. So that data package has to be something that is really sort of trodden. Obviously we touched on IP. Is that something else that's really important for us to sort of say, yes, this is something that we can defend? And there has to be a very clear development path. So where we're sort of taking the opposite side, where the biology is less known, where there is not necessarily a full data set, and where the IP position is maybe it's based on not necessarily novel composition of matter, but it's a reformulation of something that's probably not going to give us the same strength from a defensibility perspective. There's not going to be a champion internally to say, yes, we really need this, because while it may be incredibly beneficial for patients down the line, there's no way that we can justify spending potentially millions of dollars to get it to that stage where it's able to be to be available for patients. Yeah. So there has to be sort of the storm of all multitude of sort of supporting features for us to go forward. And if one or two of those is missing, it just takes that much longer for us to either, go forward with the transactions, but really from a due diligence standpoint, identify someone in the company that's going to stand up and say, yes, we really need this, because there has to be that person or group of people in the company, because oftentimes they're competing priorities. So I'm one person, I'm one search and evaluation person that's bringing one set of opportunities to the company, but there's so many of me in the company. And so, and not only search and evaluation, but there's also the internal pipeline that we're competing against from a prioritization standpoint.
Yeah. And I think that academic scientists don't realize when they're going to their own conferences is that so is your team of scientists at Merck. They're also attending the same conferences, and that getting them to understand the science that you're working on. I mean, they're not, if they come to your poster, it's not by chance. Usually they're there to learn a little bit more, and they can serve as an internal advocate for you down the road. It's not just good. There's multiple routes to get into a large company, and having that internal champion is seems like a really big piece of it.
100%.
Well, I want to touch a little bit on this something that you mentioned, and that might be Jenna's old hat as well, of understanding that translation risk. There's been a big push to move. I mean, we all know the phrase of mice lie, monkeys exaggerate, and humans fail. So what is that translation piece is such a huge part. I mean, there's always been a push to do an animal model, but have you seen with iPSCs and human cell lines and this push to move away from animal models? I'd love to get Paige and Jenna your perspective. Does that help a translational risk from your perspective, and that would allow universities, tech transfer offices, to be okay with, hey, this isn't in an animal model, but we have an incredible human, organoid model that has shown us X, Y, Z?
Maybe I'll take a stab and say yes, 100%. I think where there are models that replicate the disease biology, that is all for the best on our side as well. I think we similarly are doing some of this work internally and developing these various models to, again, sort of further validate internally different mechanisms of action that we're looking at, or different opportunities that we're evaluating via an MTA as an example. And not all the time does something have to come in a pretty box in an animal model that's been tested, because to your point, the number of times we've cured Alzheimer's disease in a mouse is countless.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the same perspective, but just some animal models are better or more favorable, or do a better job of replicating the biology. I think it depends on really some of the genetics. It depends on whether there's preservation of the same proteins and isoforms across the species for a specific disease and for specific models. Make sure you're using the right models. I mean, we do see this, and it's really unfortunate when folks do something that maybe it's a little bit cheaper, but it ends up kind of, you did not the killer experiment, and unfortunately that doesn't get you closer to where you need to be. When you're asking about in vitro models versus in vivo, I don't think it's an either or. I actually think it's typically an and it's best if you can have multiple models that have orthogonal axes of risk that all point in the same direction, that's a really good thing. And I spent a lot of time in tissue culture in my decade plus in academia. And so I think we've come a long way with, sort of the sophistication of the in vitro models. That said, they are an oversimplification. So even if they, reflect the human, biology and genetics for the cell types that are there, even if they're co-culture models, there's still going to be, missing pieces, the immune system or something else, so the tox and whatnot. So, I think it's great that we're being open-minded about, how to take the most efficient and ethical path to getting into the clinic. But, you need to be mindful, because the point of all the preclinical work is to make sure that we are doing our best to understand whether, a potential medicine is, potentially efficacious, but, first and foremost, safe before it goes into a human. And so, sure. It's really important to reflect and make sure that, the right compound is moving forward. Sometimes we see this, with founders who are eager to move forward with the thing they have rather than, optimize it fully. They'll say, oh, there's only a little bit of CYP induction, and I think the therapeutic window will be there. And, you don't want to, it's better to fail fast if you can, and, go into clinic with the best medicine that's likely to succeed, because, it's really hard to get across the finish line. So you got to put your best foot forward.
It goes back to the getting feedback from people like you and from people like Paige, and understanding what it is you're going to need to do before you go to Andy and to Chris to either file IP, to get your startup that license agreement, getting that feedback of what is the killer experiment, what is going to prove to Paige and to Jenna here that this is a real thing. Knowing that piece of it can make this process go a lot faster. Of course, you want to have all the confidentiality agreements in place before you start. If you give too much, I had to add that piece of it for Chris or Andy so they don't yell at me. But any other comments on that, Chris or Andy?
Nothing for me.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it nail on the head. It's important for everyone to have and consider as they're going in and thinking about going down that path.
Paige?
Elaine, I was just going to say, the one thing that I want to ensure that people know is that oftentimes when we're looking at opportunities, we're going to say no on the first round. So that's something that I don't know if everyone is aware of that. Oftentimes the killer experiment hasn't been completed from our standpoint. And so don't be disgruntled by the fact that we say, hey, listen, interesting science is great, but listen, we're not interested. It doesn't mean that the door is shut. It just means that either we have to adjust our strategic areas of interest and they are adjusting, or there are prioritization efforts that are ongoing that maybe they need to play out, or that killer experiment is one that you provided to us in a verbal setting and you now need to run that study out for us to be convinced, whether it's in vitro or in vivo, that yes, to Jenna's point, the data that you've generated is corroborated by this next experiment, and that's going to get us over the hump.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point there. And let's see. And I have to say, I've actually had the pleasure of pitching both to you and to Jenna, and we still like each other, even though you've said no, not yet. I mean, it's important feedback for me to help make sure that I'm making the right decision of whether I should license this technology or whether I should go out and, spend my life and time trying to raise money for this company or not, and what makes the most sense. And so you have to have a thick skin, and it's not personal. This is business, and science it is what it is. And so, and you will hear no a lot, but what I've also found very helpful on the other side is both you and Jenna have given very constructive feedback, not just a no, not a fit. It's no, and here's why it's not a fit. And that's always helpful for a founder to hear. A quick no with, this is why we hate it. You never say that, but this is why it's not a fit is so helpful, and it prevents us from going back to annoying you if it's not in your strategic area, and making sure that I'm not sending you stuff that doesn't make sense for Merck, and that I have answered the right questions that will help get Jenna's LPs on board with what she's investing in as well. So All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I just want to thank all of our panelists for an incredible conversation today, and maybe give a quick 30 to 60 seconds of what's one thing a founder can think about as they move forward in their next negotiation. And let's start with Paige, and we'll end with Andy. Paige.
I would say it doesn't have to be perfect, and disclosing some things that are not quite there yet or that have some faults here and there, it's better to disclose them early rather than to push something forward and run the risk of having it delay on the back end.
Great advice. Jenna?
I would just say, especially if you're coming from academia, you can sometimes have a little bit of laser vision of what you've been working on. And so, you might be thinking very much about just this specific target, and maybe it's small molecule, maybe it's antibody, whatever, your approach is. As you speak to investors, they're going to be, and certainly Paige, we're going to be using a lens that's much broader than that. We're comparing this against all the other targets that exist as ways to, go after this disease. And, we're even going to be comparing this against, other opportunities that are in other disease spaces. And so the lens is going to be broader. So make sure you have just a little bit more awareness of things that might not seem immediately adjacent to what you're doing. So that it seems like you have a sense of kind of the competition, and the competitive landscape.
Great advice. Chris, on to you.
Mine is really simple. It goes back to what I said earlier. Hire a lawyer who's got specific expertise working with companies like yours to guide you through the process. It will be worth the money that you spend on it.
Yeah, I love that. Don't hire that family attorney that you've known for 100 years. You want to get someone that has been there, done that. It'll save you time, headache, and of course, money down the road. And of course, Andy would love to hear what's one action a founder can take for their next negotiation.
Well, and I sorry to steal Chris's point there, but really find partners that are familiar with working with university, whether it's legal counsel or investors or such. I think it'll help tremendously when you get into the negotiations, and that can help you understand the perspective of why the university is asking for this and asking for that. And of course, if there's something you don't understand, just ask questions. We're always happy to try to explain what this term means, what that term means, and why we're seeking these types of provisions for the startup.
That is really, really great advice. Every university is a little bit different, and finding someone that can help you navigate that can be really helpful on both sides. So, well, guys, thank you so much for your time and your incredible advice today. I've taken lots of notes, and hopefully we'll make my next negotiation a little bit easier, as well as our audience. And of course, I want to thank Baker Donelson for their support of this webinar series, and Tulane School of Medicine for continued support as well. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and I hope you can join us for our next in the series. Thank you all.
Thank you.